Welcome to the Art Settlers of New York. Today we present Robin Holder and the magic of the art of Robin Holder, who is an art prophet for social justice and income inequality. Robin, so nice to have you here in our studios.
I'm delighted to be here, Ronnie.
We are going to have an interesting conversation about Robin's work, her life, and her experience as an artist. And I would like to read from one of Robin's retrospective exhibits. Dr. Lisa E. Farrington writes, Robin Holder, Chicago-born and New York City raised, has distinguished herself as an artist whose work seamlessly fuses leitmotifs of the personal and the universal. In large part, her innate ability to draw parallels between the microcosm of her very personal experiences and the macrocosm of shared human experiences stems from the artist's identity as a woman of myriad ethnic, socio-political, and spiritual influences. The offspring of an African-American Christian father and a white Russian American Jewish mother, Holder was raised as a socialist and an agnostic. Her family lineage includes a maternal great-grandmother who was a suffragette, a great-uncle who was the co-founder of the American Communist Party, and brothers who were the members of the Black Panther Party. Robin herself confirms, "My work is motivated by my cultural background, in which layers upon layers of various racial, economic, and spiritual worlds exist within one family." Robin is indeed a treasure to the African American community here in the United States. She has excelled as a working artist in 3 continents, and we're going to explore her life and her work and her vision for all, not only the United States, but her vision for a better world. Robin, again, thank you for being here. And we'd like to start off about your family. We have a particular picture of your family. Maybe you could describe it for our viewing audience.
So that would probably be the image of my mom, my dad's mom, my 2 brothers, and myself. So visually it's kind of striking because you see that it's an interracial family. And this is in Chicago in the backyard of our house. And this is probably 1958, 1959.
How was it growing up in a family, a diverse family? I mean, the word diverse was really created to describe your family during those times.
Well, I guess you could say in one way we were very protected because my parents had been students at the university in Chicago.
That's where they met.
That's where they met. They were both New Yorkers, but they met in Chicago. And they were part of a very diverse interracial and international group of people in Chicago. But then, of course, at the time, Chicago was viciously racist and separate racially. So we lived in a particular area, and I remember periodically when we were going somewhere as a family, in the car, that our car would be stopped by the police. I don't remember exactly what happened. Nothing immediately violent happened that I can recall, but I remember being stopped regularly.
And that's something that, and it's so recent, when we think of even the 60s, it was in 1967, the landmark case of Loving versus Virginia. That allowed interracial couples to marry. Were your parents married at the time?
They were married.
They were married.
They were married.
And they were married in the state of Illinois? Or?
Yes.
Yes.
Yeah, they were married in the state of Illinois.
We have to, and this is what has mesmerized so many art lovers, and particularly your work is so intense and brings out the complexity of the different the threads of the good and painful,
Right.
the beauty and the evil that you probably saw in the eyes of so many while growing up, even
Yeah.
in Illinois.
Yeah.
And we can imagine what went on further south.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think what people don't often really realize is when you look at or think of or consider interracial relationships, there's a whole cultural, uh, spiritual, religious, and often economic platform that also is involved in that. So when you consider the fact that my father grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant in Brooklyn, New York City, and lived in a community where there were many African Caribbean homeowners, that tells you something about the world that he came from. Culturally, the foods that they ate, the music that they listened to, the religious, they were Episcopalians. And then my mother grew up in Forest Hills, Queens, where there were Jewish upper middle class professionals. So certainly in the 1940s, 1930s and 1940s, when my parents grew up, any kind of ethnic, racial reality that you would find in New York was really very distinct and very separate. And you can tell by just most people, when I tell them the neighborhoods, if they're New Yorkers, they know exactly the realities that we're talking about.
Right. We have another image of your class. Was that in? That's also in Chicago.
In Chicago, my second grade class.
How was that?
I liked going to school.
And your classmates were?
I had a
the
couple of friends that I remember. It was primarily an African American neighborhood. You can see by the children. You could see the classes were rather large compared to today's standards.
Very large.
Yeah,
in that
but I
picture.
had a whole imaginary life that I was living, and I also had very much of I guess, an activist training from very early on. So I was very aware from very young that there was the world out there, and then there was what my family believed in.
And especially even in Chicago, where I remember seeing an image of where it was you actually seeing the colored bathrooms even in Chicago, because you always think, being on the East Coast, that was just a southern colored fountain, whites only. How was that experience
I
for
don't
you?
remember seeing that, but I remember very clearly growing up in New York City and being very aware of things that people would say to me that were generated by racial ignorance. And I saw that every day. I experienced
Even in
that
New
absolutely. I was very aware of that because nobody could really figure out what my identity was. A lot of people just thought I was Latino. And since I lived on 87th Street in Manhattan for many years and then up in Washington Heights on 157th Street, there are a lot of Latinos, a lot of Dominicans, Puerto Ricans, or were. A lot of people thought I was Latina. But I remember very clearly having conversations with parents and grandparents of my friends and them wanting to try to figure out, what my identity was. And I would play games with it.
What about you were particularly impressed, it seems, with your great-grandparents, and we have an image of them.
Yeah, not that I was so impressed with them, but I just think that visually when you put our family photographs together, you see this wide range of people that are European, African, Caribbean, Latino, black, white, mixed. So it's a visual extended family that's very diverse. And I think that's often the way that people interact and assume things about other people and categorize people and decide how they intend to interact with people is based on visually what they can fathom about that person's
Right.
identity. And so much of identity is, first exposure is visual.
And but you also honor, as although you are considered one of our African American treasures in this country, but you also honor your heritage, your other heritage from your mother's side.
Yeah, I mean, it's part of me. I
Yeah.
remember very clearly in junior high school having to fill out some kind of form, and they didn't have all the options like Island Pacific, Hispanic, Latino, Black Latino, Caucasian. They didn't have any of that. Native American, they just had black, white, and other.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes I would fill in, create my own box. And
Yes.
I remember even in high school, at the High School of Music and Art, a couple of times having arguments with classmates and people saying, well, you have to choose. And I said, no, you have to change your concept. I'm not choosing, I'm just incorporating everything that naturally belongs to me. And you're going to have to open up or not open up your perception. So that, I think that's also part of the articulation of developing a voice that has to do with being an artist, is you have to at some point see how the world sees you.
When did you first, at what age did you first even think that you would become this concept that's known as an artist?
I think before I decided to be an artist, I was very aware that I would need to do something where I could have as much control as possible.
Okay.
I mean, we're talking about a little brown-skinned kid walking around Manhattan in 1960, 1961, 1962. And I always remember having the sense that things really were not the way they should be, for
Okay.
many reasons. And I was very aware that I would have to think about what I wanted to do and have a real reason for doing whatever I want to do, because that's the way my mother taught us. She talked a lot about responsibility. She talked a lot about having a voice. She talked a lot about the fact that the society really was not in our favor because we were African American or Negro. At the time we were Negroes, because we were Jewish, because we were creative, because we were leftist politically. So there were a lot of reasons, because I was a female and I had problems in school about that, because I didn't want to, they wanted us to take sewing and cooking, and I wanted to take shop. I wanted to use the machines. And I didn't want to take typing, and I just knew that the world around me was not necessarily going to just support my most intuitive inclinations. So I learned that I would have to develop a voice.
And a wonderful
Yeah,
visual voice as well.
Thank you.
That
Thank you.
we're going to be looking at some of her work, and the image behind us is from a series that you did.
The Let the Future Reveal, that I was delighted to participate in a show of women's work at Taller Boricua with that series of work, and it's a fairly recent group of works, and it has to do with the shock, I think, that our society has been going through since the economic meltdown of 2007, 2008. So usually I'm doing a lot of research for my work to try to get a sense of a global perspective of the things that interest me personally. So I started by looking at abandoned homes in Detroit, because for us, of course, Detroit is a symbol of the decline of the
Our
middle
American ci-
class
and our American cities.
and our American cities. And I had exhibited in Detroit a number of years ago, and I remember just driving through these neighborhoods of these beautiful, beautiful homes that were abandoned. And many, Detroit is also the symbol of the blue collar worker who can actually afford their own car. It was the auto industry's capital. I don't know if it still is, for many years. And that whole symbol of the labor unions and workers' rights and all of the struggle and the history that goes on with creating a country that has primarily this huge middle class. Or had, right. So that's where I started, with looking at photographs and videos of these abandoned homes. And I thought very much of the home, the physicality, the architectural presence that represents the family, the seat of society, the root, the safety net, where a person's identity begins, where networks begin, the interaction between people in a family, and how that later expands to become a society. And then I looked at a lot of photographs of people who were suffering from anxiety and depression, just to try to get an understanding of the whole facial construct, the expression of a person who's suffering, because I think that the society in general really is suffering from anxiety. I sense the tension, I sense the frustration. We see it particularly during this ridiculous presidential campaign that goes on forever.
Absolutely.
But I mean, it's easy to say it's bizarre and absurd, but it's terribly frightening, because what it really means is that millions and millions and millions of people don't have a dream that they can believe in, no matter who they are.
Right.
So whatever they figure is the answer almost is not as important as the fact that there's this sort of abyss that people feel that they're falling into.
Right. It is, and
Yeah.
sadly, it's become like a bottomless pit.
Right.
Where it's like they're reaching for, whether it's salvation, or they're searching, and they're just not finding it.
Right.
And but particularly with this series that we're speaking about, I mean, the intensity of not so much also the portraits on the actual structures, and that could be brownstones. When I first saw it, that was, as you said, inspired by homes in Chicago, but it could very well be any city in the United States. And since we are in New York, but just walking around the streets of Manhattan, where you see so many, and there have been abandoned, beautiful brownstones. And the reason that I say that you're an art prophet is because even then you were more or less talking about the future. And so how do you make a better world? And that's something that all of your art brings out, the beauty, the beauty of the people, and the beauty of the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I've used the concept of a house before. I had done that series with a grant from the Brooklyn Arts Council, Behind Each Window a Voice, which had to do with immigration. It really had to do with people in my particular neighborhood, Greenpoint, Brooklyn, which is very diverse, or is less diverse now because it's become gentrified, but the whole immigrant experience is such an important element of who America is, and the fact that so many people are fighting against that or not embracing that or pretending like it doesn't really mean that's who we are. I mean, that's really who we are. And often people who have immigrated are people who have a tremendous amount of motivation, a lot of ingenuity, great focus, and they also often are people who are really suffering for one reason or another. And
Sure,
it's
absolutely.
yeah,
I mean, for you to leave your homeland and possibly or become displaced in your homeland and have to come somewhere else. Although there's this myth about the American dream, and it's the place to, the one step below heaven or maybe one step above heaven, and then they get here and it's not that at all. Coupled with the fact that our people are also suffering, and then they may direct that suffering or think that the cause of their suffering are all these other people who are coming over, and exhausting our resources.
Yeah, and even more difficult, I think, for immigrant families is that the parents and the grandparents remember another life, and there's a disconnect between them and their children who grow up here, because it's very rare that an immigrant parent can truly understand their children's experience if their children grow up here.
Right.
And so the power starts shifting. The family dynamics start shifting. And that's a very serious change or alteration in the family construct. At the same time, people who are immigrants are often doubly capable because they can speak more languages,
Yes.
they can communicate, they bond together because they need that extended family. They're much more considerate of their neighbors, and they're very collaborative in the things that they do. And so, the farther away from immigration that an American person gets, often the more self-centered they get, the more isolated they get from family, from community. We have very strange conflicts in our nature as Americans. And I mean, from traveling and living abroad, I've seen very much that we're seen as being very unique in our independence and our, quote, forward thinking, but we're also seen as being extraordinarily selfish.
Yeah, did you find that? I mean, you've had the privilege to be able to live and work as an artist in 3 different continents.
Yeah,
which,
yeah.
North America, including Mexico,
Yeah.
and South America and Europe.
Yeah, yeah.
How was it for you being a working artist and being not a starving artist?
Yeah.
Say during your time in these 3 continents.
I mean, it's really about trying to understand how other people live and what's important to them, and living and working abroad is what really kind of taught me what my Americanness is. Because, of course, when I was abroad, I was introducing myself as an African American, and they were all kind of like, oh yeah, but you're an American. For most people, the Americanness was prominent, not the African Americanness.
Right,
I had to
right.
really kind of submit to that and try to understand what that was all about. And I asked somebody once in the street, why are you just assuming I'm American? He said, you walk like an American woman. No other
Interesting.
women walk like that. I said, well, what is that? And they said, you walk like you own the world.
Okay.
So that kind of was shocking to me, and I had to really think a lot about that. And I think that's also something that you have to reconcile with yourself. If you're a person who feels that you want to make a statement with your life, or you want to influence people, or you want to share your voice, or if you believe that your point of view is something valuable enough to share with people. In order to do that, you have to really do a lot of reflection. You have to really get down to why you're doing what you're doing. What does it mean? Do you have the right to do it? Does it have value? Who does it have value for? What part of your art making is very self-serving, because certainly a lot of it is very self-serving. What part of it is universal? And so there's a lot of empowerment that goes on with that. And at the same time, there has to be a lot of humility, because the more access you get to fulfill your sense of self, the more humble you need to be.
And
It's
that's
it's a very delicate dynamic.
and that's something
Yeah.
I guess that evolves, say for artists, and regardless of the whether they're visual or performing artists,
Yeah,
where there is a sense of ego
yeah,
that has to be kept in check.
yeah,
And the more you are recognized, or the more accolades you're able to receive,
yeah,
you have to keep your ego in check and remember the larger picture. How do you inspire
yeah,
the newer generation of
Yeah.
artists?
you do.
One of the things that you also expanded was with this other work that we have images, and that is intense, and is the child slave labor, and the outsource that you call child
Slave
Slave
labor, the outsourced series. I mean, I'm the kind of artist who really is obsessed with identity and humanity, the human condition. But at the same time, I'm also really fascinated with trying techniques, exploring materials, trying to see how far I can go with certain techniques, doing things that are new for me all the time, so that I keep striving. But
with this particular series where we have where we have in the image of the boy, that little boy is carrying what?
Yeah, the boy is working and he's collecting the cacao, which is going to eventually be fabricated into chocolate. Oh no, this is another one, and it's for some reason the proportions of the images are not correct on the screen. But this is chocolate,
Right.
and
And chocolate is a commodity.
chocolate is an
Traded.
international commodity. That series outsourced, I started because I just started looking around my studio and my home, and I started realizing that most of what I have now is from another country, fabricated in another country.
Okay.
And then I started thinking about the demise of the blue-collar workers and the manufacturing in the United States, along with the breakdown of the labor unions and protection for workers. And of course, in anything, whether it's national politics or racism or fascism or whatever is going on that influences the conditions of the people, you have to follow the money trail. It's always about money, territory, and access to natural resources, always. So I just started looking at the different particular items that I have. And
So in the case of the cocoa bean,
okay, so I'm a
cocoa beans.
chocoholic.
Okay.
Seriously, chocoholic. So I said, well, let me just track how chocolate is made. And I did that piece right around the time of the International Chocolate Show. The International Chocolate Show travels to several countries. When it comes to New York, the times that I've been there, it's been at the Metropolitan Pavilion on 18th or 19th Street, somewhere around there in Chelsea. And they have chocolatiers from all over the world, and there's every possible kind of chocolate: chocolate with fruits, with nuts, white chocolate, black chocolate, 30% chocolate, 80% chocolate, all kinds of chocolate. And they have clothes made out of chocolate. They have a little test kitchen with demonstrations. They have a library set up temporarily of all kinds of literature about chocolate. They have a place for children to play. And they have all these chocolatiers that give out free samples.
Okay.
So it's like,
But yet, as
the
we
wo-
enjoy the,
as we enjoy chocolate,
it,
there
but there's
are
a story behind it.
there
Such
are
as depicted in this little. In
yeah,
this
there
little boy.
are children who are kidnapped,
Talk to us
and they're
about that.
enslaved, and they are taken to live in small little structures, maybe 8 or 10 young boys in a maybe 14 by 20-foot cabin, and they have to work the fields. They have to harvest.
In what countries? Or this particular.
If you bring it up, I can read. Because most of these pieces have text to them. So if you bring it up again, I can just read it.
And
Because
then we had another one of another little boy.
so what the idea for me was with those pieces is the text in the image. The top part has like a story of a child's actual life. And then underneath it, there's the text of my relationship to that particular reality. So, for example, this is about cell phones. And this yellow container is a plastic container that a young boy in the Democratic Republic of Congo would use to work in these very primitive, and I mean primitive, mining situations along the riverbanks. There is a mineral that is used in all cell phones that is called coltan. And this, when it's refined and manufactured, can hold electrical charges without heating up that high. You'll notice a lot of times if you're charging your phone or you overcharge your iPad, it'll start to get hot.
Right.
There's coltan in all cell phones.
We don't know about this, and this is
And
what's so wonderful about your art.
Yeah, what happens in these situations is people on horses go to small villages not too far from the rivers. They rape the women, they murder the fathers and the grandfathers, and they steal the boys. And they take the boys to go and work along these riverbanks, digging up this mineral in really, really, really bad conditions. They don't have any protective gear. They don't have any clothing that really protects them from doing this. And they mine for this material, this coltan. But as they're doing this, they're destroying the ecological balance of the rivers. And these rivers flow through national park areas. So they're contaminating the water source, which means that a number of different animals in these areas where they are supposed to have protected wildlife are dying. So it's sort of like a triple, a triple vicious, violent disregard for life, all so that we can have these cell phones. And when I was reading the UN reports about this coltan and slave labor in the Democratic Republic of Coltan, it's all coinciding with the advance of cell phones. Because what we Americans probably don't know generally is that in many countries, a lot of people never got to have landlines. Because in some countries you have to be a homeowner to have a landline. So in India or China or Vietnam, a lot of under-industrialized countries, many people, because of outsourcing, were able to afford a phone for the first time,
they're
and
cell
that's
phones.
a cell phone.
Right.
And then we change our cell phones very regularly because they get smaller, they get to be more capable and they do more things. They have cameras, you can play music, you can watch videos, blah, blah, blah. So we're changing ourselves. It's not like you buy one cell phone and then you're going to have that for the rest of your life.
Like the landline.
Right,
Many
right.
people still have the
Yeah, yeah.
rotary
Right.
landline
Right.
phone that has always
Right.
been in the kitchen
Right.
or somewhere in the house
Right.
now.
Right.
But that's a secure
Right.
line regardless if the electricity
Right.
goes out. Absolutely.
Right.
You
So,
have,
so I just want to say a little more about that. So in all of those images that I created that had to do with outsourcing, the art making process was I did something new that I hadn't done before. Is I would have one layer that was the child, which is sort of monochromatic, not very bright in color, and then it has areas that are open, and underneath that or behind that there's another layer that's very saturated with color. That represents my reality. And so it's a physical, like a double layer representing a double reality.
well, like the
of
images that we have
humanity.
of the girls.
Yeah.
In that series.
Yeah, so a lot of my work is about merging realities physically or psychologically or emotionally or historically.
Right.
Or spiritually. It's always about some sort of tension or some sort of conflict or something that is unexpected, something that is not generally considered compatible. Because that's the way I see, because of who I am, that's the way I see the world, is these conflicts or these layered realities that often there is no resolution to it. Or I'll die before there's a resolution to it. So you have to figure out
Hopefully not.
how you're going to reconcile this. A friend of mine, an artist, came to my studio when I just started the outsourcing, and I remember very clearly the conversation. She said, so why don't you, in the text that you are developing for these pieces, why don't you mention the actual corporations that are at fault? And I said, no, because the whole idea is that I'm an unwilling participant in this vicious, violent, evil reality. I'm participating in it because I have a cell phone, and I'm not willing to get rid of my cell phone.
Right.
So, I mean, we're laughing, Ronnie, but there's a lot of things that you have to do in the world where you have to find a way to embrace the conflict that you're living. Right. Or you have to figure out a way to do something so that you're rebalancing the positive and the negative of your life. I mean, this is my mission, of course, or my mandate. And I'm ruthless about it. I mean, with myself, I'm thinking about this all the time.
And it's something that you apparently were challenging even as a little girl when you would challenge, even in school, certain policies that you just, I disagree with that. And you must have been something, at the age of 9 or 10.
Yeah, it was
challenging the principal and saying, well, why is this like this?
Yeah, I had a lot of, I was blessed, I guess you could say blessed, to be able to figure out really young what was important to me. But one of the most important lessons I learned was that you could actually like somebody who was ignorant. I learned that in school because I had a teacher who I didn't think that her lesson on immigration was proper. She didn't talk about the indentured, she was my 4th grade teacher. She didn't talk about the indentured Chinese railroad workers. She didn't talk about the kidnapped African Negroes. She didn't talk about the fact that John F. Kennedy's father was murdering labor union fighters. But I loved her. I thought she was wonderful. Mm-hmm. So early on, I realized that you could really like people who were ignorant or who were not really thinking about things in a humane way, or not going to be willing to do anything about the injustice in the world, that you could really like them. That was one of my most important discoveries, I think. Yeah.
But and that's evident in this outsourced exhibit. Now you also did some tools.
Yeah.
That was
Yeah.
part of what
Yeah.
we
Yeah.
speak about that.
Yeah,
what
the
what
tool,
that's
yeah, the
about for
tools
women.
were the tools were used in two different ways. I was thinking about women in society and the struggle of women to fulfill their own mandates or their natural inclinations or the way that society treats women. And I really did have, sort of a constant struggle with that because my natural inclinations were really very tomboyish. You know, I was a tomboy when I was a kid.
Well, there's a reason
Yeah,
for that.
and I just wanted to do things that I thought were powerful. And when I was in junior high school, I wanted to take shop. I wanted to use the machines. I wanted to learn how to use the electrical tools. I wanted to make things.
You have an electric drill as an important.
That was what, yeah.
tool.
And they would not let me take shop for two reasons. One reason was if you were advanced in the accelerated academic, they didn't want you to do laborious things. That was, I had a lot of problem with that, lots of problems with that. And they didn't want girls to take shop. So my mother arranged for me with a colleague of hers who gave a class at the 92nd Street Y. On Wednesdays, I would take the crosstown bus from 86th Street crosstown, walk up to 96th Street, and take my shop class.
Interesting.
You know, when I was in junior high school. So what was that? I was 11, 12. And I liked using those tools, and I have a whole studio full of tools
That's
now, which
right.
I like learning how to make things. I like watching people make things. I'm fascinated with the way things are made. And being an artist, I'm very physical about it. You know, as much as I think about it and as much as there's a spiritual element to it, I really like the physicality of it. And I like the self-serving involvement that I have because I'm not a musician or a dancer or an actor who has to work in ensemble. I really am spending a lot of time with my own dialogue.
By yourself, right.
Yeah. And that's wonderful, but I think it's also something that I have to be careful about.
And it certainly helped with even doing work around your studio home.
Yeah, yeah.
Putting together your deck.
Yeah, I mean,
by the river
we built
and,
almost
you know,
everything in there, yeah.
Yes, yes.
Yeah. So, yeah, that feeling is very empowering to me, that you could just take some materials and use some tools and learn some techniques and you could actually make something out of nothing. That's glorious to me. And I'm really saddened to see that young people today have less and less of that. They have less and less opportunities. I mean, I really do come from a generation who had a lot of adventures, and I still have adventures. And I see that a lot of young people, everything is monitored and managed and strategized in advance. There's almost no open window for them to figure anything out, and that really makes me worried.
And it's all about
it's all about, yeah.
the keyboard. And
Yeah. So I think we have to, the creative process is a process where ideally you should not really know where you're going to end up. You know, there has to be a big open question mark. But then at the same time, you kind of are in charge of a lot of elements on the way to making something. So you kind of do have a sense of what things might end up looking like. But certainly the process of making the art is more stimulating and invigorating and more challenging than the final
well, there's
piece.
also, and again, it's also about economics and you know, and right now when we were be talking about social justice for the artist.
Mm-hmm.
You know, although an artist can say, well, I'm an artist for social justice, but yet they too have to pay the bills, and because not so many. There's still, though there was a talk to me about the times. It seems like maybe the late 80s and the 90s. There was an environment where there was money for artists.
There we had, because we had the National Endowment of the Arts, we have the New York State Council for the Arts, North Carolina, Minnesota, Boston, New Mexico, Arizona, Florida, all have very big percent for art programs. There,
What happened? What do you think?
there was also a lot of corporate and foundation money floating around. In New York City, certainly, we had a lot of money available. That's how I was able to do all of those public commissions that I did. That was how I was able to participate in a lot of really exciting and innovative exhibitions and programs and projects, because we had so many cultural and visual arts organizations. And not only that, we had arts organizations that were dedicated to promoting the making of art. Now it's much harder. You'll find some money available for presenting art, museums and galleries, but not for actually workshops and instruction and training programs or places where people can actually make art. And at the same time, because we're in an economic decline, and certainly in New York City, real estate is almost, we don't even need to get into that. It's just absurdly out of reach. Where are you going to make your work? And then how are you going to buy the art materials? Are very expensive. So that, in a way, generates a lot more intellectual, conceptual work, and digitally it's cheaper in some ways. And I see the younger artists are working in a different, they're not as physical because maybe we're in a digital world, but also maybe because they can't afford to, have a space and buy materials.
Right.
And
yeah, certainly you can take your laptop.
Yeah, anywhere. Right,
Absolutely.
right.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, it's the creative.
There's a sense of loss then.
There is. It's hard to know if you can say that this is the natural progression of things, because this is the reality that we're dealing with. Some things have a natural growth. They reach a certain height and then it starts to decline, or it starts to reinvent itself. And all people that are creative thinkers are always thinking about that, the ebbs and flows and the growth and decline of tendencies, of trends, of styles, of messages.
Do you find that artists now, like the new generation, as opposed to those from your generation, are trying to find a gimmick?
Yeah, it's interesting that you said that.
It's as if, and it is economic as well.
Yeah.
They just take off, or
yeah. First of all, I don't think this country, America, really ever developed a real long-lasting interest in the process of creation. We've always been consumers. I mean, if you go to Norway or Nepal or Argentina or Cuba or Turkey or Italy, any middle-class person can name a few contemporary writers, a few contemporary musicians, actors, painters, dancers, because they're much more connected with their culture, with contemporary, with the arts. And they have it often in the schools. It's a real integrated part of their training and their education. Americans are shopping. Americans spend a lot of time shopping, a lot, and a lot of resources shopping. So I've never really seen in this country an across-the-board middle-class fascination and interest in the process of creating. So that's one aspect. The other aspect is nowadays people want to be celebrities. They don't really necessarily think about developing anything that has a meaningful presence in the world. They just want to be known. And
You've got to find your gimmick.
you have to have a gimmick because it all happens very fast. It has to happen really. I mean, I'm just really even surprised at some of my friends and colleagues who post the work that they're working on the internet. So, okay, so if you're posting the work that you're working on today, when you have your show in 8 months, why should we even go and see the show? Because we've been watching you every 2 weeks develop this thing. So what, you know, I'm from a different generation that works and prepares and tries to figure out when something is finished and ready to go and be publicized, and then supposedly we're ready to actually figure out what it is we did for the past year. I mean, when you're working and developing something and creating, sometimes you don't really know what you're doing until you get a chance to look at it and let it talk to you. I mean, it's a really call and response process, if you're lucky.
Yeah.
You know. But now people really want to be seen, they want to be heard, they want to be known.
Immediately.
Immediately. That's the word, immediately. And I don't really feel comfortable with that. And that just might be because I'm from the generation I'm from and I'm not used to it. But I mean, I teach, when I go around and meet people in universities, when my exhibitions are in different places, I'm not that impressed, not that excited about a lot of what I see. But I don't really see a lot of genuine exploratory activity. I don't see a lot of soul searching. So I don't see any real experimentation or exploration of materials or concepts. Or
Well, maybe again, it goes to trying to meet a deadline when you're commissioned by you're invited to do something, and it has to be ready by this time, 4 weeks.
And I know what that is. I've had the luxury of being successful in a certain way for a certain period of time, where you come up with a concept, you decide what the techniques and materials will be, the general intention of the work, and then you have a show coming up, or it's a commission and you have to finish it. But after that, it's really production. You have to produce this thing.
Right.
So all of the questioning and experimenting then stops. It's just fabricating. And that, is part of it.
But somehow that you've got to find even the joy in the creation. You even have to find the joy in this insanity, because by adding the time, the timeline that you've got to complete everything by, that in itself, being successful and producing something, and people will will bring joy or make people think about what it is that you're exposing. You're technically exposing your soul in your work.
Exactly. And I think
subject to criticism as well.
Well, yeah, that's that's something that you really have to come to terms with. If you're going to be a creative person, if you're going to reveal yourself, you have to have a core that can withstand being ignored is the worst. Being ignored or being challenged, or even being admired. Being admired is very difficult sometimes too, very difficult.
Because they expect more the next time. And
they do, and then you have to kind of really find a way to answer questions in somebody else's terms. And that's a big responsibility. I mean, it's very, very taxing to try and communicate with people in a way that they will understand you. You know, I think that's what makes the difference between somebody who is genuine and somebody who's just a prima donna and their attitude is take it or leave it. You either understand what I'm doing or later for you.
Right, right.
So people will see things in something that you did and they will see it in their own terms and they'll have their own perspective. And if you really do want to have an interaction or a connection with people, you have to open yourself up to try to follow that potential thread. It takes a tremendous amount of energy. It really does. And that's one of the difficulties of, by the time I finish a series and it gets curated somewhere or exhibited somewhere, I'm not even thinking about that anymore. I'm thinking about something else. So I have to sort of bring
yourself back.
my wherewithal back to that and give it its due in order to interact with people because they want to ask questions or share their experiences that are sort of sparked by what they see. And that's a whole nother layer of being an artist in the world. And it takes a lot of energy. It takes a lot of integrity, I think. Being an artist is very difficult in ways that people don't really think of.
Right.
You know, they
No,
think
even the whole image of, you know, the either idealism or the starving artist, you know, who doesn't.
Yeah, I mean,
who's
it's
so
kind of like
talented in
so
the,
completely.
you know, you see with a bottle of water,
yeah.
or
I mean,
empty
okay.
bottle of wine and a piece of bread and.
A good example is when I did They Damaged Us More Than Katrina piece.
Okay.
And that was horrifically painful because, I mean, it was days and days of watching this horrific reality unfold and trying to create a piece at the same time. It's emotionally and spiritually very, very, very devastating because you have to come up with something coherent.
So what do you say to our viewers who may have children who are thinking, who they see they have a potential as artists?
I mean, I would say children need to experience art making not because they intend to be artists, but because they want to explore the world around them. They want to express themselves.
Okay. Well, thank you, Robin. And thank you for staying with us until we meet again. This has been the Art Settlers of New York.